From growing up in a cult-like home to multiple narcissistic relationships, I know what it feels like to be stuck. And I know it really sucks. This is my story of stuckness and 10 tips that might help you get unstuck. For me, it started at a really young age. I had a narcissistic pastor for a father, and I was not allowed to participate in anything called life outside the church. We weren't allowed to have friends or any type of experience that wasn't church related. I even went to a church school that had often less than 20 kids, and most often, very rarely, even one my age. We weren't allowed to listen to secular music or watch movies or even watch TV more than 1 hour per week, and it had to be an approved television program, which usually ended up being the news or something my parents wanted to watch. We weren't even allowed to play with friends down the street. That's how secluded and isolated our world was. So needless to say, the feeling of stuckness started very early for me. And of course, along with that came depression and anxiety. But because it had started so early for me, I was led to believe that this was all there is. That's how life was just going to be. And no matter how much my heart ached and I yearned for what I now know to be life experience and connection with others, I just had to suppress those desires. I had to accept this was the life I was going to live. I was led to believe that that was how life was going to be. It also sent me the subtle message that my desires, my needs, my yearning, my knowing at a subtle level that something just wasn't quite right, I was led to believe that those messages, those signals were wrong and bad. I was led to believe that my desires in general were bad. And somehow they even managed to deliver the message that having fun was bad, living life, wanting to live life. And what I learned at a very subconscious level was that I needed to suppress my emotions, my desires, my feelings, the signals that were designed to help me understand if things were going well or not well. I learned to divorce myself of the signals that are meant to guide us through life. There was a fracture in me as it relates to the signals, the emotions, the desires that are supposed to help us navigate life. I was taught to suppress those signals. I was also taught that feeling stuck and sad about it was a normal thing, and we should just suck it up. I came to realize later that we are taught that suppressing our emotions or foregoing our needs is seen as a superpower when it shouldn't be. I wasn't allowed to talk about how bad I felt inside, and that led to not understanding what I was feeling or why I was feeling it. In fact, I had parents who didn't even understand their own emotions, let alone how to teach a child how to navigate and manage her own internal environment. So the first step in getting unstuck is learning to navigate, learning to understand, learning to interpret the signals that are there to help us understand what might need to change. We want to start to understand depression and anxiety and the feeling of stuckness as sort of signposts in our lives that help us say, hey, something's up here. We need a little bit more love. We need a little bit more attention. The key here is, what do you need? Stuckness is a feeling. Stuckness is an emotion that is designed to help you see where things are a little off track, where we're missing something, where there's an unmet need. The same with depression and the same with anxiety. So it's important to remember, you deserve to have your needs met. Not only do you deserve it, the divine needs you to have your needs met so that you can raise your vibration and elevate to the highest potential that you were designed for. Stepping into our purpose, finding a fulfilling life, creating a life that we love, that we want to live, all requires having your needs met. So I'm here to tell you, here's your hall pass. You get to have your needs met. You deserve to have your needs met. And stuckness can be the opposite of growth. And if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we know that self-actualization, otherwise known as growth, is at the top of the pyramid. That is considered a basic core human need, just like food and water and rest, love, connection. We must grow. And so that feeling of stuckness is there to say, hey, something's up. We're missing a core need. we need to grow. And I'm sure you've heard the phrase, we're growing or dying. We're moving in one direction. We just have to decide which one. And when we lack growth, we will feel discomfort because it is designed to get us to make a change and to move towards meeting that need. So ask yourself, what do I need? Give yourself a hug, rub your arms, comfort yourself a little bit and say, what do you need right now? Make a habit of asking yourself that question frequently, many times throughout the day, especially when you're feeling an uncomfortable emotion. What do you need right now? What is the unmet need and how can we meet it resourcefully? Not through unhealthy coping mechanisms, but in a way that will nurture and feed your soul. And this leads me to another point that is important to clarify because we can get kind of confused between feelings and emotions. What is the difference? Feelings are not things we necessarily want to listen to. Emotions are signals and signposts. So how do we know the difference? Emotions are energy in motion that arise through the body based on your environment or your needs or your beliefs. That can get complex as to what causes the emotion, but let's just stick with the difference between emotion and feeling for now. An emotion usually arises before conscious thought. And so it will be, let's say you are driving and someone cuts you off and you have that flash of, right, that rush of adrenaline or high alert that is there to help you stay on guard so that you don't get in a car accident. From there, so the emotion is that flash of, whoa, versus the feeling that might come from that is anger and frustration and aggression. Those feelings are based on the emotion plus the story of how dare that guy cut me off. The sensation that arises in the body could be considered the emotion that is designed to help you maybe slam on your brakes or pull to the right to protect yourself from the person that has cut you off, versus the feeling is the sensation in the body plus the story of how dare that evil person cut me off or what a jerk, right? So the story attached to the sensation that came from the body is the feeling. The sensation in the body of stuckness is the signpost that says, I need growth. The story around, I don't want to clean my house because I'm too tired, or it'll take too long, or I have other things to do, is what we don't want to listen to. So start to differentiate the emotion, the sensation in the body, separate from the feeling, which is the sensation plus the story. We want to start to make friends with our emotions and start to decipher them and understand, what are they trying to tell you? What is the unmet need that we need to meet resourcefully? And this leads me to one of my favorite tips. Looking at the etymology of the word asking, we can see that we remain as king by asking questions. And so when we have an emotion arise, that sensation of stuckness, we can ask intelligent questions around our needs. What do I need right now? We also want to take stock of the questions that we have asked ourselves historically and see how they may not be resourceful questions. Maybe we've asked ourselves, when will I get it together? Or why can't I get this done? Or what's wrong with me? Or why can't I control my behavior? These are very dangerous and damaging questions. We are as king when we are asking the question. If you are powerful, and your questions will call to you answers, you want to be very careful about the questions you ask yourself. They are dangerous questions because the brain will always find the answer to the question that you have asked. And in this case, the answer that you receive is likely going to stem from a limiting belief that you already have about yourself. Maybe that there's something wrong with you. We can look at two cognitive functions that help us understand why this is so dangerous. There's something called confirmation bias, which means you will always find the evidence to prove the thing you believe. That's just how the brain is designed to work. We also know that the reticular activating system will seek out and find more of the thing that you are searching for. So if you're searching for evidence of something wrong with you or a reason why you can't get this thing done, your brain is going to find it for you. That's how much it loves you. We can look at the example of when we buy a car. Maybe you decide you want a red Ford truck and you have never really seen them around town before. You start searching for them on the internet, and then all of a sudden, a few days later, all you see are red Ford trucks everywhere. Who knew that vehicle was the most popular car in town, or at least now so it seems, because that's all we see. The reticular activating system is a function in the brain that sifts through what's important and what's not. We don't have the capacity to take everything in, and so the brain has to decide this is important and this is not. So if you have asked the question, what's wrong with me? Through confirmation bias and the reticular activating system, you will find lots of evidence to prove there's something wrong with you. So we want to remain as king by asking intelligent, resourceful, productive, loving questions. Let's ask, what are my hopes, my dreams, my desires? What am I able to accomplish today? What are my gifts? What are my skills? What are my talents? What new skill can I learn? What is my purpose? What goals can I set for my life? How can I live more authentically? How can I see myself more honestly? And am I holding myself back by any of the questions or beliefs that I'm employing at this time? Now, remember, you don't have to reject the current version of yourself to be able to move into your highest self or your potential. You just have to love who you are now and love where you're going or who you're becoming. I fell into that trap too. I thought there was something wrong with me and I was the reason why people weren't treating me properly. I felt stuck all throughout my adolescent and teen years until that ripe old age of 16 when I moved out of the house because my stepfather pinned me to a wall. And yet I was happy. I left the house and I thought, this is it. I'm finally free. I'm finally going to get unstuck. I'm finally going to be able to be happy and feel good about myself and live my life. But to my surprise, that feeling of stuckness followed me everywhere I went. I felt stuck in poverty when I was struggling to survive working 3 jobs and sleeping every other night while I was in high school. I felt stuck as a waitress when the bartenders were the ones making better money. I felt stuck in small town Wisconsin when I dreamed of moving to the big city of Chicago. And even though I eventually became a bartender and moved to Chicago, I still felt stuck. Somehow these changes that I was making that were supposed to set me free weren't actually accomplishing the goal. No matter what I did, I could not escape that feeling of stuckness. And that's when I realized I have to do something different. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a new result. And that leads us to tip number 3. It actually is true that by changing your physical environment as well as your state of physical being, it can help us get unstuck. One Harvard study found that by standing in the power position in the mirror for 2 whole minutes will decrease our cortisol by 18%. It will increase our testosterone by 20%, and it will make us 33% more likely to take calculated risks, which actually is very beneficial when you need to move from an old place in life to a new place in life. And while I'm not recommending that you move every year for 20 years straight like I did, we can start by just standing in the mirror in the power position. And we can even incorporate earlier tips and start asking powerful questions like, how can I make this day amazing? Or how amazing am I? What am I going to discover about myself today? Or even, how can I make cleaning the house fun? Whatever your goal is, start to ask powerful, resourceful questions in the power position in the mirror. You can even ask yourself, how amazing will I feel when I have accomplished this goal? Start to see ahead a little bit. Another fascinating benefit of moving and changing your environment or changing your physical state of being is that by going outside and observing beauty in nature, scientists have found that it actually increases not only our creativity, obviously our energy, our serotonin, and our dopamine, but it also increases our desire and our capacity for creating beauty in our life. When we observe beauty, we want to create beauty. So if you're struggling with cleaning your house, maybe go outside for a walk and just look at how beautiful life is. And maybe you might be inspired to make your environment beautiful as well. And the 4th tip ties into tip number 3. When we come back from our walk and we're feeling inspired to create beautiful things, we can also create a delicious, beautiful meal for ourselves. Because part of changing our physical state of being and the way we feel incorporates our physical body and how we nourish it. Did you know that dopamine and serotonin, the things that make us feel good, are actually created primarily in the gut? And in order to create them, we have to have a healthy microbiome. These things help us feel motivated, excited for life, happy to be here. If we're feeling low energy and low motivation, we might want to consider removing the toxins from our environment and feeding for a healthy microbiome. Things like natural raw fruits and vegetables, or even cooked fruits and vegetables, can help populate the microbiome. I've even heard it suggested we should have up to 30 different types of plants per week. You don't have to have a lot, but just a little of everything will introduce lots of different microbes to the microbiome and help your gut produce those chemicals or hormones that are going to help you feel the motivation and the drive that you need, maybe even love for life. Unfortunately, I didn't discover the microbiome strategy until much later in life. And while moving every year would make me feel happy for a couple of weeks or a month or two, that quickly faded. And that feeling of stuckness followed me all the way through adolescence, teens, and into my 20s before I finally woke up to what was happening. And even though I was driven to learn and trying to figure out what was happening, I would make changes and find myself right back where I started. No matter what changed in my external environment, I couldn't seem to kick this habit of feeling stuck. And of course, depression, anxiety, and even addiction will come along with that. I found myself in the deepest dark night of the soul, not even understanding what that was, and questioning if life was even worth living anymore. To top it off, I accidentally found myself an unmarried single mother, and I was abandoned by my son's narcissistic father. There never seemed to be enough money, and it seemed that my depression was going to win. I had never felt more stuck in my life. Luckily, my running buddy was also a psychologist, and she mentioned I might want to see a therapist. Luckily, having friends in the industry meant I had a good recommendation from a friend, which, by the way, I am a huge proponent of asking for recommendations because not all therapists are good. Just like everyone else in the world, there are good and there are not so good. And I remember the first day I sat down with him and I said, I feel so stuck in my head. I don't know how to get out. And I didn't even realize that that was part of the problem, was the stuckness in my head, until I had asked the question, what do I do about this? And he gave me a book called The Peaceful Mind. I literally to this day will credit that book for my awakening and helping save my life, because I had never before this moment realized that I had hundreds of thousands of terribly negative thoughts running through my head all day, every day long, completely unchecked. It was as if someone had turned on the light bulb in a dark room, and I finally, for the first time in my life, at 27 years old, saw all of this crap floating around in my head. And that leads us to tip number 5. I came to realize that the brain is not designed to run the show. And yet, if we let it, it will run amok completely unchecked, happily. Unfortunately, the brain is not designed to keep us happy. It is designed to keep us safe. And to the brain, safe equals similar, same, familiar, not change. The brain is also, through its desire to keep us safe, going to seek out all of the different negative issues or problems in your life. It thinks that by only looking for problems, it's going to prevent pain and suffering. But unfortunately, the brain has come to a place where it's time for us to help it evolve by taking control and helping it see that there are positive things in our life as well, not just negative. Did you know that we have 80 to 90,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of those tend to be negative, and 95% of them are repetitive? That's a lot of negative thinking. That's a lot of pain and suffering, because when we have a negative thought, your body is flooded with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. It will make you feel not only unhappy, but very, very stuck if we are living in this constant cycle of negative input. And this is where we can employ something called cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as CBT. It's pretty simple. I'll boil it down for you, but if you get that book, The Peaceful Mind, it will also highlight the exercises to do this. So what we do is we start by just noticing our thoughts. We want to just be aware of them. Turn on that light bulb in your dark room and start to see, what thoughts am I thinking? Then from there, we want to start to categorize them. What types of thoughts are they? What beliefs do they stem from? So if I have a thought, there's something wrong with me, I must have a core belief that I'm bad, wrong, or broken. And so we want to bucket these thoughts and then understand the beliefs that they stem from, and then start to challenge and question anything that is negative is not necessarily true. In fact, no amount of negativity will ever help you progress towards your dreams or your goals. So we can just get rid of that right now. And this leads us to tip number 6. We want to start to consciously choose our self-talk. Ask yourself the question, what do you say to yourself when you talk to yourself? A great book as well if you want to check that one out. Managing our internal dialogue can be very difficult, especially for those of us who experience complex trauma. We have a tendency to take on the voice of our abuser and again, berate ourselves with the words or the language that we experienced when we were young or in toxic relationships. And while the brain somehow thinks that this is helping you, it thinks that by talking to myself in this way, I'm somehow going to prevent the pain of waiting for someone else to speak to me that way. So start to notice, what do you say to yourself when you talk to yourself, and make sure it's kind and loving. No amount of negativity is ever beneficial. It will not help you change, and it most definitely will not help you heal. Let's become our own cheerleader. Love on yourself. Be kind to yourself. Encourage yourself. Say beautiful, warm things. Comfort yourself. And practice self-care, self-love. Look for your strengths. Look for the things that are good about you. And remember that everything you did in the past needed to be done. Whatever you did is completely forgiven. Have grace for yourself, because you needed to survive, and you did what you needed to survive. In fact, congratulate yourself. Give yourself a pat on the back and recognize you did good, because you're here now. You survived, but we're no longer there anymore. So we don't need those strategies anymore. Now we can step into a new way of being and step into a new life. Go back to that mirror, give yourself a pep talk, love on yourself, and then go accomplish that goal of getting your house clean. Which leads us to tip number 7. You may still find yourself telling yourself some stories about, I can do it later. It doesn't need to be done now. We want to have self-honesty here. Look that story squarely in the face and ask yourself, is that really true? Will you truly feel better if you postpone the goal or put off the thing that you have promised yourself you're going to do? Really look at the repercussions of not showing up for yourself. We self-abandon when we make ourselves a commitment and then don't follow through. We want to question those stories. Is it really true? Let's remember that even I'm stuck in the story. We don't want to tell ourselves unresourceful stories, because again, we are creators and we will create more of the same. Our words are powerful. We have spelling because we are casting spells with our words. So be careful those stories that you tell yourself. They likely will come true. And as with most things, when we tell ourselves, don't do that, we leave an empty hole and we're like, what do I do then? So instead of saying, don't do that, we want to say, do this. So let's tell ourselves positive stories. The story of, I'm breaking free. I am powerful. I am a creator. I am a child of the creator of the universe. I am made in the likeness, frequency, and vibration that creates worlds. There is nothing I can't accomplish. There is infinite potential when I co-create with the divine. And as you tell yourself these stories, notice how much better does that feel? Which leads us to tip number 8, take action. Being stuck is actually a function of being stuck in the head. When we take action, we set ourselves free. After a few months of seeing my psychologist, I became fascinated with psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, and all things having to do with managing thoughts, managing the mind, managing our state, and finally accomplishing happiness. That's when things finally started to move for me. For the first time in my life, I finally felt like things were flowing, not just through me, but to me almost effortlessly. And I finally felt empowered to create a change in my life. I had no idea how many limiting beliefs I had subconsciously adopted in my childhood and toxic relationships. I didn't realize how much power I had and how much I had given away to external circumstances and people around me. And I most certainly did not realize the power I had been gifted by my creator or how to use it. When I learned how to control my thoughts and utilize this power that I had been gifted, this is when things finally moved and started to flow. I began to create my life consciously, and I was able to draw in the love of my life. We got married, had 2 more beautiful children, moved into our beautiful dream home. Life was finally getting good. And yet I hadn't reached the finish line yet, although I thought I did. While I loved my husband dearly, we struggled to be good for each other. I found myself in another toxic relationship pattern, and I couldn't believe, how did I end up perpetuating this cycle again? And that's when I discovered complex trauma. While we can have the best intentions for love and relationships and the people around us, if we have unhealed wounds and trauma, no matter how much we control our thoughts, our nervous system and our subconscious brain will continue to draw into us the experiences that are needed to help us see where the ultimate healing needs to happen, sort of the roots of the weeds that we adopted when we were young or in toxic relationships. Those unhealed wounds will cause us to perpetuate unhealthy relationship dynamics because complex trauma is a relational wound. And then this will lead us back to feeling stuck again and wondering, how do I get off this battlefield? We all have our preferred go-to trauma responses. Mine was to run to a new house every single year, or even to fawn through people-pleasing, overgiving, self-sacrifice. Being stuck can also be a sign of a freeze trauma response. And it can be especially exhausting when we try to force ourselves to do things, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, willpower push through, when we're fighting against unhealed trauma in our nervous system and in our body, no amount of pushing will ever create success. And we'll just be left extremely tired and fatigued, not to mention beating up on ourselves. And it can be frustrating to know what we are supposed to do or what we need to do, but we somehow can't seem to get the subconscious brain or the body on board. It can often feel like the battle of the brains. You've got the intelligent brain that knows what you're supposed to do, and the subconscious brain that says, that's not safe, we're not going there. And it can feel a lot like tug of war. If you struggle to find the energy, the drive, and the motivation to accomplish your goals, you may be in a freeze response and want to look into somatic trauma healing therapies like trauma spotting, which again saved my life. Just keep in mind, talk therapy alone doesn't work. That's trying to solve a physical problem with a cognitive solution, and that does not work. Somatic healing therapies are required. And once I finally learned how to heal my trauma, that's when the sky was the limit. The glass ceiling had been removed. I was even able to step into healing my relationship as well. To quit my corporate job and step into my purpose, which I could not seem to manage to make happen prior to trauma healing. And now I have the business of my dreams. Not to mention the relationships around me are healing, not just my intimate relationships, but also my relationships with my family, helping my family see where their trauma healing may need to occur. The goodness chases me down and continues to pour into my life. And I find myself sometimes pinching myself saying, I love my life. And I never even thought that was possible. And it's amazing how those unhealed wounds and traumas will cause us to believe that we have to work hard or earn or push or strive or struggle, when in the end, after we heal and get all of these blocks out of the way, it can flow very easily and naturally, effortlessly almost. And of course, there are still times of blocks and misalignments, but once we integrate this healing and this release and these strategies that I've walked through today, you'll find that when you're a little off alignment, it doesn't take so long to get back. You're not stuck for days and weeks and months and years anymore, maybe at most a couple of days, preferably hours or even minutes, when you realize the misalignment and you can go back to, what do you need right now? What are the thoughts? What are we creating? What are the beliefs? What's the wound? And do the somatic healing, you can very quickly get back into flow and effortless ease. It's all about realigning to the divine will for your life and regulating your nervous system. And finally, that leads us to tip number 10. Sometimes we can feel stuck because we don't know where we're trying to go. We have to have clear goals, and there are strategies for setting those goals. I will preface this with saying, if you don't know what your goals are, you struggle to find your dream, that again can be a trauma response. Oftentimes when I meet with clients, they'll say, well, I don't know what I want, or I just want to be able to pay my bills. I just want to move out into a cabin in the woods and not have to deal with people. And to that I say, my heart hurts for you, because that is a wounded dream. You have a dream, you have a goal, you have a wish, a desire. It is safe to trust the desires of your heart. It is safe to trust the guidance of the desires of your heart. The divine put those goals and those wishes and desires in you to help guide you towards your purpose. So notice, if your dream looks more like survival instead of thriving, again, you may want to look into complex trauma and somatic healing therapies like trauma spotting. Start to dream bigger. Allow yourself to step into the beautiful life and purpose that the divine has for you. And remember, the tide rises all boats. So as you elevate yourself, you are elevating the collective whole. Set smart goals. Make it specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. You can do this. I know you can. If you'd like to know more about complex trauma, check out this video here. I love you, my friends. Namaste.